Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize if there was any confusion with the parking situation and hope that you found us okay. My name is Christian Bush, and I'm a sophomore McConnell Scholar. 25 years ago, the McConnell Center began as an idea to attract and nurture outstanding young leaders for Kentucky. Since then, more than 250 students have gone through our program and have received more than $3.5 million in scholarship funding. And the center has expanded well beyond its simple founding vision. As the year goes on, we will highlight one aspect of our program at each of our public events. In January, we highlighted our growing partnership with the American military. Tonight, it is my honor to be a part of this important intellectual event with Kent Masterson Brown, but also my privilege to ask Ms. Deborah Skaggs, the archivist of the McConnell Chow Archives, to come forward and tell you a bit about our archives and education gallery. But first, I would ask that you join me in a moment of silence for First Lady of the United States, Nancy Reagan. Thank you. Ms. Deborah Skaggs has served as the curator of the U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell and U.S. Secretary Elaine L. Chao Archives, a program of the McConnell Center since May 2009. She held the position when the Archives and Civics Education Gallery opened on Veterans Day, November 11, 2009. After graduating from the University of Louisville with a BA in History in December 1970, and then teaching 8th grade at Jefferson County's own Wagner High School, Deborah began her archival career in 1975 here at the University of Louisville and the newly established University Archives. While working in the University Archives, she was a founding member of the Kentucky Council on Archives. After 11 years and earning her MA in U.S. History, Deborah moved to Alabama and joined the staff of the Alabama Department of Archives and History in Montgomery. Here, Deborah rose in responsibility from division head for records management to assistant director for government records. She was elected treasurer of the National Association of Government Archivists and Records Administrators, the first woman to serve in this capacity. She became a founding member of the Academy of Certified Archives, and in its second year of operation, she was elected vice president, a position with the responsibility of creating, maintaining, and administering the annual certification exam. After 10 years in Alabama, Deborah took a new challenge in the private sector and held the position of archivist and records manager for Frank Russell Company. She worked at Russell for 9 years, where she learned about record keeping and regulations in the financial service industry. In 2001, she was elected to be a fellow of the Society of American Archivists, the highest honor bestowed on individuals for contributions in the archival position. Upon returning to her hometown, Louisville, she worked for Iron Mountain as a records management consultant. Now she has come full circle, back to the University of Louisville, and to the Ekstrom Library where she left in 1986. She tells me managing the McConnell Chow Archives is her favorite job. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ms. Deborah Skaggs.
Thanks, Christian. Well, Gary tells me I have 2 minutes to tell you about the archives and the Civics Education Gallery. So to make sure that I didn't overrun my time, I did write out something, so I'm going to read that to you. The archives is a repository for the records of long-term significance created and maintained by Senator McConnell and his staffs, and Secretary Chow and her staffs. The records include correspondence, speeches, daily schedules, briefing books, legislative reports, photographs, campaign ads, press releases, records of those natures. And they include valuable documentation about their careers in public service, one in the legislative branch of the federal government and the other one in the executive branch, and also records about their families. The records, of course, right now are not open for research because we're still going through them to see what's there. The Civics Education Gallery, located in front of the McConnell Chow Archives and is just down the hall through the double doors, includes exhibits that tell their lives, meaning McConnell and Chow, their life stories and details the careers of both the senator and the secretary to provide lessons about American government and American history. The exhibits use primary sources documents, photographs, campaign ads, testimonies, and artifacts to tell their stories. The gallery also includes a small theater where you can watch 2 short films, one inspired to lead about Senator McConnell, and The Promise of America, that both have won national educational awards. The Civics Education Gallery was designed to be self-guided, but if you drop by and I'm in the archives, please ring the doorbell and I will be glad to show you around. The gallery is open when the Ekstrom Library is open. Also, for the teachers that are here tonight, a special welcome to you and your students. We have designed a scavenger hunt, and you may have gotten it when you walked in. It was out on the table. They look like this. One side has a picture of the senator, and the other side has this picture of Secretary Chow. We've designed one for elementary school students, one for middle school students, and one for high school students. This activity has been very well received by both teachers and students. And if you're interested in a tour and bringing your students, please contact our civics education coordinator, and we'd be glad to host you for a tour. I'll be in the gallery after our presentation tonight if you'd like to walk through, and I'll be glad to show you the civics education gallery if you've not been there. Thank you very much.
Tonight, we continue our year-long series, exploring that essential topic of citizenship and statesmanship. In this important election year, we don't think there are many more important topics besides the intersection of citizens and political leadership. Last month, we highlighted the achievements of Abraham Lincoln. Tonight, we discuss one of the many great debates that caused such divisions in America during its formative generation, and that story has part of its origins right here in Kentucky. Our speaker tonight, Ken Masterson Brown, completed his undergraduate degree at Center College and earned his Juris Doctor degree from Washington and Lee. He has practiced law for more than 40 years, prosecuting many high-profile cases challenging unlawful and often unconstitutional government behavior. Mr. Brown was the creator and editor of the national magazine, The Civil War, and author of Cushing of Gettysburg, the story of a Union artillery commander. He is presently working on another major study on the Gettysburg Campaign, entitled General George Gordon Meade and the Gettysburg Campaign, which is scheduled to be published in early 2017. He is president and content developer of Witnessing History, LLC. Mr. Brown has also written, hosted, and directed award-winning documentary films, including Henry Clay and the Struggle for the Union in 2011, Daniel Boone and the Opening of the American West in 2014, and recently, I Remember the Old Home Very Well, The Lincolns in Kentucky, which premiered last month. Mr. Brown was also the first chairman of the Gettysburg National Military Park Advisory Commission, having been appointed by President George Herbert Walker Bush. He was also the first chairman of the Perryville Battlefield Commission, a member of the Kentucky Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Commission, and is now a member of the Gettysburg Foundation Board of Directors. He has been given numerous awards for his work in Civil War history and for his published works and documentary films. He was named a 2014 Distinguished Graduate from Center College. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ken Masterson Brown.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Can you all hear me all right? It's a pleasure to be here. You know, the McConnell Center has been a sponsor of the last 3 films we've produced. The one on Henry Clay, the 2-hour film on the life of Daniel Boone, and the work on Lincoln that has just premiered on Kentucky Educational Television. So it's fun to be here, and I'm honored to have been asked. For tonight, though, let's turn back the clocks to the summer of 1798. The fledgling republic had been plunged into a quasi-war with France, brought about primarily over America's neutrality in the war with Great Britain and France. Diplomatic relations with France, The American colonies allied during the Revolutionary War had been broken in April. France then attempted to restore those diplomatic relations with the United States by demanding that it pay a large bribe. If you can imagine this. The President of the United States at the time was John Adams of Massachusetts, a Federalist. Both houses of Congress were controlled by members of the President's party, as was the federal judiciary. And anything Adams proposed and the Congress enacted had little chance of ever being changed. But there was growing unease over Federalist rule. The Vice President of the United States at the time was none other than 55-year-old Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, the de facto head of a growing Republican Party. While Federalists were advocates of an ever more powerful federal government, Jefferson's Republicans advocated a less centralized federal government and more respect for the powers of the states. In domestic affairs, the Republicans fought Alexander Hamilton's system of financing the United States government, the Bank of the United States, and excise taxes with little or no success. As war with France seemed imminent, President Adams approached Congress with measures to address what was believed by him to be a growing threat of internal unrest due to France and its supporters in the United States. Adams was alarmed by the excesses of the French Revolution, and he was determined to prevent the spread of French radicalism in America. You can imagine how close this is to events we see today. The measures proposed by Adams and the Federalists to answer this embraced three different acts: the Naturalization Act, the Alien Act, and the Sedition Act. The Naturalization Act changed the naturalization law to alter the period of residency necessary for citizenship from 5 to 14 years, and to require a registration of all white aliens, and to forbid the naturalization of alien enemies. Does this sound familiar? The Alien Act permitted the banishment of aliens under the simple order of the President, and in case of refusal to depart, it authorized imprisonment and deprivation of rights to become a citizen. So if the alien objected, he'd be imprisoned automatically on the issuance of the order by the President. The Sedition Act was even more complex and far more radical. Its first section declared France to be a public enemy and made giving comfort or aid to Frenchmen or France treason. The second section made acts of concealing treasons punishable by fine and imprisonment. The third section was directed against combinations and conspiracies to resist the laws. And the fourth section included two classes of practices that were considered seditious: the publication of seditious practices and the publication of seditious libels against the government and its officers. The defense of truth in a libel action was permitted. Incredibly, the effective date for the termination of the act was the end of the John Adams administration, or March 3rd, 1801, giving Republicans cause to accuse Adams of trying to insulate himself and his administration from criticism rather than protecting the United States from unwanted French influence. The Republicans in Congress struggled to block passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts. In foreign affairs, the Republicans generally supported neutrality in the war between France and Great Britain, but they demanded a policy sympathetic toward the new French Republic. In those states where Republicans dominated the political scene, there was a sense of alarm over the powers Congress assumed in the Alien and Sedition Acts, particularly over the control of free speech and free press in the Sedition Act and the resurrection of seditious libel as a felony. Jefferson's own state, Virginia, there were meetings held in dozens of counties where the Alien and Sedition Acts were condemned and demands for repeal were issued. New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania sent petitions to Congress demanding repeal. Adding to the alarm were indictments handed down against individuals in Massachusetts, Vermont, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, who it was claimed had voiced or published criticisms of President Adams, and even criticisms of the Alien and Sedition Acts themselves. Every one of those persons indicted were convicted. One of those indicted was none other than the grandson of Benjamin Franklin, who, by the way, died in prison awaiting trial. As vice president, Jefferson made no public statements at all about these acts, not wanting to criticize the very government of which he was next in line to be president. Rather, he set about a course of quietly organizing a sympathetic group to assault these acts from his home at Monticello. It was generally agreed among Jefferson and his confidants that the mouthpieces of the protests should be the state legislatures. After all, it was pretty hard to indict and convict all members of the state legislature. There was also another reason, though. Jefferson firmly believed that the Constitution was a compact, a contract between the states, and the states thereby were parties to that compact, and that they had the right to police it. After all, the Constitution was drafted and ratified, he thought, by the states. New York and Virginia actually ratified the Constitution, expressly subject to their right to rescind ratification if they were not happy. It could only be amended by the states. And Article 7 of the Constitution reads, "The ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states so ratifying." It was a constitution between the states, Jefferson firmly believed, no matter what the preamble said about "we the people." The states, as parties to the Constitution, had a duty to police the federal government, thought Jefferson, as the federal government was only a creature of the compact, and the states were the protectors of the liberties of their respective citizens. As parties to the compact, thought Jefferson and James Madison then, states could rescind their ratifications of the Constitution and withdraw from the Union if they believed the government and other states had breached its terms and refused to cure the breach. Jefferson found solace, ironically, in Alexander Hamilton's Federalist Numbers 26 and 28, in which he wrote, "The state legislatures would not only be vigilant but suspicious and jealous of the rights of the citizens against encroachments by the federal government, and they would readily communicate with each other in different states and unite their common forces for the protection of their common liberties. It was in Kentucky that Jefferson found resistance to the Alien and Sedition Acts to be the most intense. The feeling here was nearing frenzy. Kentucky was settled largely by Virginians, but unlike the Old Dominion, Kentucky was separated from the rest of the Union by the rugged Cumberland Mountains. Kentuckians had different needs that were vastly different from those along the seaboard states. Kentuckians also had the spirit of the backwoods. It was a spirit of independence and self-reliance. They loved horse races, cockfights, and games of chance. Andrew Jackson would later claim that he never saw a Kentuckian without a gun, a pack of cards, and a bottle of whiskey in all of his life. Kentuckians sought to separate from Virginia with Kentucky's earliest settlement. Separation finally occurred, and Kentucky had been admitted to the Union in June 1792. To Kentuckians, the very framework of society was shaken by the Alien and Sedition Acts. Although Kentucky had elected Federalists as United States senators, the political climate had changed dramatically by 1798. In Kentucky, wrote the New York Herald, being a Federalist had become of all political sins the most mortal, and the charge of it once proved on the most popular man in the state would as effectually terminate his political respectability as a conviction of sheep stealing would ruin his moral character. Kentuckians had reacted almost violently to the whiskey tax in 1791. Federalist United States tax collector in Kentucky, Thomas Marshall, father of future Chief Justice John Marshall, filed suits against nearly 200 distillers for unpaid taxes. Kentucky's first United States District Judge, Harry Innes, a Republican who loved his whiskey and hated the tax found against all the defendants, but arbitrarily awarded the federal government only half the amount due, and in each case gave liberal terms for repayment. Judge Innes may have been, unwittingly, the one who contributed to Kentucky's early preeminent position in the distilling of whiskey. At a meeting of citizens of Clark County, Kentucky, held in Lexington, 10 resolutions were passed on July 24th, 1798. Those resolutions were the first such protests reported out of Kentucky on the Alien and Sedition Acts. And Jacob Fishback, chairman of the meeting, reported them to Lexington's Kentucky Gazette, the first newspaper ever published in Kentucky. And here's how some of them read. Resolved. Now this is from the grassroots now. This is out of Clark County, Kentucky, Winchester. Resolved that every officer of the federal government, whether legislative, executive, or judicial, is the servant of the people and is amenable and accountable to them. That being so, it becomes the people to watch over their conduct with vigilance and to censure and remove them as they may judge expedient. That the more elevated the office and the more important the duties connected with it may be, the more important it is a scrutiny and examination into the conduct of the officer, and that to repose a blind and implicit reliance in the conduct of any such officer or servant is doing injustice to ourselves. Resolved that the Alien Bill is unconstitutional, impolitic, unjust, and disgraceful to the American character. Resolved that the privilege of printing and publishing our sentiments on all public question is inestimable, and that it is unequivocally acknowledged and secured to us by the Constitution of the United States that all the laws made to impair and destroy it are void, and that we will exercise and assert our just right in opposition to any law that may be passed to deprive us of it. Well, the Clark Countyans directly attacked the Sedition Act, declaring it void because it transgressed the guarantees of free speech and free press protected by the First Amendment. It was a grassroots attack. Kentuckians were facing momentous problems in 1798. A man named Amiosa Delano of Mount Sterling, Kentucky, wrote a letter to his brother living in Vermont. And he wrote this about Kentucky. He says, "Money is extremely scarce here. The most distinguishing characteristic of the state at present is the desperation of the citizens respecting politics. They in general disapprobate the late measures of Congress with respect to the Alien and Sedition Act, and likewise the power vested in the president for raising troops and borrowing money. A majority of the counties in Kentucky have convened their citizens and enter into resolutions against the aforesaid measures, which are forwarded to Congress. In Lexington, a spontaneous assemblage gathered along present-day Cheapside in August 1798. Some said more than 6,000 people attended. 21-year-old Henry Clay, who had arrived in Lexington from Virginia and opened his law office only a year before, spoke against the Alien and Sedition Acts. Then Colonel George Nicholas rose to the roar of the crowd. After service in the Revolution as a lieutenant colonel of the 11th Virginia Continental Line Regiment, Nicholas, a Federalist, had become a member of the Virginia Convention that ratified the Constitution. In the convention, he vigorously advocated ratification. A very able lawyer, he had moved to Lexington before Kentucky's statehood, establishing his home on Limestone Street. Nicholas's brother, Wilson Carey Nicholas, would serve as a senator from Virginia and governor of Virginia. Wilson was an intimate friend of Thomas Jefferson. When Wilson died in 1820, he was buried alongside the plot Jefferson chose for himself at Monticello, showing the closeness between the two. Colonel George Nicholas, Wilson's brother, had made a name for himself in Kentucky. He had become the author of Kentucky's first Constitution and Kentucky's first Attorney General. By 1798, he was chairman of the law department of Transylvania University, a school that in 18 years had become nationally distinguished for its college, law, and medical schools. Nicholas was a corpulent man. His very close friend, James Madison, referred to him jokingly as that plum pudding with legs. Living in Kentucky, Nicholas had become identified with the Republican Party. Highlighting his abhorrence of the sedition law, Nicholas addressed the crowd. And this is in part what he said. "In vindication of my right as a free citizen of the United States, to, and as an exercise of, the invaluable privilege of speaking and publishing my sentiments of the official conduct of those who have been appointed to administer the government of the United States, and which is in itself so inestimable that the want of it must render all other earthly things of no value, I do solemnly declare that I do verily believe that the majority of the legislature of the United States who voted for the act entitled an act in addition to the act for punishment of certain crimes against the United States have violated that clause of the Constitution of the United States which declares that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. And I do further solemnly declare, and I do verily believe, that the President of the United States have approved said act, and that any of the judges have by any official transaction endeavored to enforce it, that they have also violated that part of the Constitution. Like the Clark County citizens, Nicholas leveled his assault against the Sedition Act. Although he felt short of declaring it void, he claimed that it violated the First Amendment. And anyone who supported it in Congress and the Adams administration, and any judge who enforced it, violated the First Amendment. An oblique way of asserting that citizens should regard it as void and resist any attempts at its enforcement. Shortly thereafter, Nicholas became seriously ill. He would die on July 25th, 1799. Nicholasville and Nicholas County would be named in his honor. He's buried in the old Episcopal burying ground on 3rd Street in Lexington. As Nicholas faded into the background of the dispute over the Alien and Sedition Acts, a young successor stepped forward. His name was John Breckinridge. Born near Stanton, Virginia in 1760, Breckinridge grew up in Botetourt County and attended what is now Washington and Lee University. While a student, he was elected to represent his county in the House of Delegates in 1780. Breckinridge moved to near Charlottesville, Virginia 5 years later, marrying Miss Mary Hopkins Cabell. Breckinridge became acquainted with Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, James Madison, as well as the Nicholas family while living in Charlottesville. He was elected to Congress in 1793, but left his office and moved his family to Lexington, the first capital of Kentucky after statehood. The Capitol building then was a tavern known as the Sheaf of Wheat Inn on Main Street. By the end of 1792, the capital had moved to Frankfort. John Breckinridge established a farm on the Iron Works Pike, north of Lexington, named Cabell's Dale, in honor of his wife, and there he opened his law office. Within months, Breckinridge was elected president of the Democratic Society of Lexington, an organization dedicated to removing Spanish influence over the Mississippi River, as well as expressing a sentimental loyalty to the French. Democratic societies had become popular and came into existence literally all over Kentucky. Breckinridge was nominated as the Republican candidate for the Senate in 1794. He was defeated for the Senate by arch-Federalist Humphrey Marshall of Franklin County, the first cousin of the future Chief Justice John Marshall, who was also married to John Marshall's sister Mary. I'll let you figure that one out. John Breckinridge became Attorney General upon the resignation of Colonel George Nicholas, accepting the position from Governor Isaac Shelby. Young Breckinridge was elected to the Kentucky House of Representatives from Fayette County in 1797. He was a rising Jeffersonian Republican. He was over 6 feet tall, with a spare and muscular build. His hair was light brown, as were his eyes. He was an easy and dignified speaker, always incorporating a touch of gravity and sternness. Paying close attention to the events in Kentucky, Thomas Jefferson and his confidant Wilson Carey Nicholas determined upon a course of action in the summer of 1798. From Monticello, Jefferson concluded that he would draft resolutions to be introduced into the Kentucky General Assembly. The resolutions would express the compact theory of the Constitution, the fundamental liberties embodied in the Constitution that Jefferson believed were transgressed by the Alien and Sedition Acts, and call upon Kentucky to outright nullify the hated acts. Here in Jefferson's own handwriting is his draft of the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798. Jefferson and Nicholas agreed that young John Breckinridge should introduce and advance the resolutions. After all, Breckinridge was an ardent Republican. He was known to Jefferson and to Wilson Carey Nicholas. He was bright, energetic, and could be trusted. Breckinridge had also developed an almost preeminent position in Kentucky among its growing Republican ranks. Wilson Carey Nicholas met with Breckinridge in Charlottesville in early October 1798 and handed him Jefferson's handwritten resolutions. Jefferson worked only through surrogates, keeping himself as vice president out of the public eye. John Breckinridge returned to Lexington, as this letter of his indicates, in November 2nd, 1798. He edited Jefferson's draft of the resolutions and created a new copy for introduction into the House of Representatives, where Jefferson wrote that Kentucky would nullify the Alien and Sedition Acts. Breckinridge softened the language, resolving instead to ask Kentucky and its sister states to join Kentucky in declaring the Alien and Sedition Acts null, void, and of no force. A notable example to me of practical statesmanship, as it was a resolution that he wound up drafting that sought to obtain the consideration of sister states in nullifying, not a unilateral nullification. As Breckinridge noted, he introduced the resolutions on November 8, 1798. On Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, November 8, 9, and 10, Breckinridge's resolutions were under discussion in the House. William Murray, a noted lawyer and Federalist from Franklin County, rose in opposition to the resolutions. Murray was the disciple of Senator Humphrey Marshall, and Murray voiced Marshall's publicly stated objections to any opposition to the Alien and Sedition Acts. And this is in part what Murray said on the House floor. The legislature of Kentucky has now been called upon to do what? To stretch forth their hands to support the ark of the Constitution? Yet at the very moment they are calling upon you to preserve the Constitution, at the very moment they are calling upon you to declare what is and what is not the theory of your Constitution, are they not tempting you to violate the Constitution? Are they not calling upon you to exercise a power which has never been delegated to this body, while exclaiming against usurpation, will you yourselves become the usurpers? Because the Constitution of the United States has been violated, will you violate your own Constitution? Where is the clause which has given you the censorship? Where is the clause which has authorized you to repeal or declare void the laws of the United States? This Constitution was not merely a covenant between integral states, but a compact between the several individuals composing those states. Accordingly, the Constitution commences with this form of expression: we the people of the United States, not we the 13 states of America. But does the Constitution give to the state legislatures any authority to censure either the executive or legislative departments of the general government? Is there any clause either in the federal or in the state constitution which delegates the power reserved by the people to their state legislatures? No. It is the people only that have the right to inquire whether Congress hath exceeded its powers. It is the people only that have the right to appeal for redress. To illustrate how much the Jeffersonian Republicans had overtaken the political apparatus in Kentucky. William Murray was the only member of the House of Representatives to rise in opposition to Breckinridge's resolutions. That's how literally wiped out the Federalist Party had been by 1798. But Murray's remarks now foreshadowed the attacks upon states' rights that would dominate the rhetoric of Federalists and even many Whigs, not the least of whom was Daniel Webster, well into the first half of the 19th century. The Constitution, they would say, was ratified by the people, not the states. And they would emphasize that. And thus the states could not interfere with acts of Congress. The Constitution was not a compact, they would argue. Webster was the heavyweight in that struggle. It was not a compact, it was a constitution. There was a sense of anticipation in the old Capitol building in Frankfort. All eyes in the House of Representatives were cast on John Breckinridge. Breckinridge rose to advance the resolutions. He knew his opponent, William Murray, very well. He knew Murray had spoken for his own arch political enemy, Senator Humphrey Marshall, whose views on the Constitution were anathema to John Breckinridge. And this is in part what Breckinridge said in reply to Murray. Though that gentleman, Murray, might regard the state legislature as so contemptible a body that they had nothing to do but sit in that house and silently view the depredations committed on their rights, I have a very different opinion of their character and authority, and for my own part held high my importance as a representative of the people of Kentucky. State governments cannot entrench on the powers delegated to the general government, and the general government cannot entrench on those which are retained by the states. If then the general government should transgress the limits prescribed to them by the Constitution, how are they to be restrained? Are they to be restrained by themselves? Is their discretion to be the only measure of their powers? The idea is absurd. It is possible the gentleman can mean that Congress are the sole judges of the propriety and constitutionality of all acts done by them. My idea, Mr. Chairman, of the true relative situation of the state governments and of the general government is concisely but clearly stated in the first resolution before you. So long as I regard my liberties, I shall oppose the principle now contended for by the gentlemen for a consolidated government. To be explicit, sir, I consider the co-states to be alone parties to the federal compact, and solely authorized to judge in the last resort of the power exercised under the compact. Congress not being a party at all, but merely the creature of the compact, and subject to its assumptions of power to the final judgment of those by whom and for whose use itself and its powers were all created. I do not consider Congress, therefore, the lords and masters of the states, but as their servants. But when they pass laws beyond the limits of the Constitution, laws which they are no more authorized to pass than the Grand Turk, we do not ask a repeal, but ought to make a legislative declaration that being unconstitutional, they are therefore void and of no effect. If upon the representations of the states from whom they derive their powers, they should nevertheless attempt to enforce them, I hesitate not to declare it as my opinion that it is then the right and duty of the several states to nullify those acts and to protect their citizens from their operation. And who are the judiciary? The body in which the gentleman places such unbounded confidence. Who are they? But a part of the servants of the people created by the federal compact. Should the federal servants deem the Alien and Sedition Acts constitutional, I doubt not they will reject these resolutions. But if they think otherwise, they cannot object to so moderate and peaceable a measure as that of addressing the sister states, which is all we do. We do not pretend to set ourselves up as censors of the Union, but we firmly express our own opinions and call upon the other states to examine their political situation. I therefore now challenge the gentleman to come forward and to controvert the resolutions and to prove that the laws complained of are constitutional. I do aver they are not, and do aver also that the great political truths contained in these resolutions cannot be controverted until republicanism and its votaries become extinct. Contrary to Murray and Senator Humphrey Marshall, Breckinridge, like his mentor Thomas Jefferson, believed the Constitution was a compact between the states, and that because of same, the states had a duty to declare null, void, and of no force any act of Congress the states believed violated the Constitution. On November 10, 1798, the Kentucky resolutions passed both houses of the General Assembly. Only William Murray voted against the resolutions in the House. Attesting to the resolutions in the House was none other than Thomas Todd, Clerk of the House, who would be nominated by Thomas Jefferson when he became president as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, serving from 1807 until 1826. Governor James Garrett approved the resolutions on November 16. Kentucky had gone on record in the words chosen by Jefferson and by Breckinridge as follows. And this is how an element of the resolution reads. The several states composing the United States of America are not united on principles of unlimited submission to their general government, but by compact under the style and title of a Constitution of the United States and of amendments thereto. They constituted a general government for special purposes, reserving each state to itself for the residuary massive right to their own self-government, and that whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. That this compact each state acceded as a state and is an integral party, its co-states forming as to itself the other party. That the government created by this compact was not made the exclusive or final judge of the extent of the powers delegated to itself, since that would have its discretion and not the Constitution, the measure of its powers. But that in all other cases of compact among the parties having no common judge, each party has an equal right to judge for itself the infractions in the mode of redress. Then it asks simply that Kentucky's sister states ask them to consider the appeal. It did not unilaterally nullify the Alien and Sedition Acts, but expressed Kentucky's belief about their validity and asked the states to judge for themselves. James Madison, the so-called father of the Constitution, would draft similar resolutions in the General Assembly of Virginia. Introduced by his cousin John Taylor of Caroline County, the Virginia resolutions passed both houses of Congress, both houses of the state legislature on December 21, 1798. And this is one paragraph Madison wrote. The powers of the federal government resulted from the compact to which the states are parties. So they were in agreement. And in case of a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted by the compact, the states who are parties thereto have the right and are in duty bound to interpose between their citizens and the unlawful acts of Congress. for arresting the progress of the evil and for maintaining within their respective limits the authorities, rights, and liberties appertaining to them. To interpose, to put the state between its citizens and the unlawful act. Virginia, like Kentucky, sought only to ask its sister states to join it. It never did, and it even referred to it as a protest. It never unilaterally sought to nullify anything. Rather, it asked its sister states to join it and consider what they have written. Breckinridge then introduced a second resolution in the General Assembly, which passed both houses on November 14, 1799. In the second resolution, Breckinridge actually added Thomas Jefferson's original declaration, quote, that a nullification by the states of all unauthorized acts done by the general government under color of the Constitution is the rightful remedy. But again, he referred to this second resolution as a protest, asking sister states to join it. It's interesting that in the late summer of 1799, during the height of the clamor over the Alien and Sedition Acts, young John Marshall, who had just been elected as a Federalist to Congress from Virginia, traveled to Lexington and to nearby Woodford County to visit with his ailing father, Thomas Marshall. Thomas Jefferson was informed of Marshall's travels. Jefferson and Marshall were cousins, but bitter political enemies. Suspecting Marshall was coming to Kentucky to cause trouble, Jefferson wrote a letter to Wilson Carey Nicholas on September 5th, 1799. There he declined Nicholas's request that he make public presentations about the Kentucky resolutions because he wanted to avoid suspicions. But then Jefferson wrote, "The visit of the Apostle Marshall to Kentucky excites anxiety. However, we doubt not that his poisons will be effectually counterworked there." Marshall never made any public utterances about the controversy. Rather, he visited his mother and father and all his siblings, talking over the family's vast landholdings in Kentucky, no doubt. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions failed to win over any state besides the two. Some states denounced them. Some states ridiculed them. But the resolutions brought about a significant victory. Thomas Jefferson was elected president in 1800, and the Alien and Sedition Acts ceased to exist on the day he was inaugurated. Young John Breckinridge would be elected to the United States Senate upon the retirement of Humphrey Marshall. He then accepted President Jefferson's nomination to become Attorney General of the United States. Breckinridge would die prematurely in 1806, having successfully defended Jefferson's purchase of Louisiana. He's buried in the Lexington Cemetery. On his tombstone is inscribed, "John Breckinridge, author of the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798, defender of the Louisiana Purchase." Breckinridge County would be named for him. He was the progenitor of a family line in Kentucky that included noted lawyers, physicians, educators, clerics, and public servants, not the least of whom was his grandson, John Cabell Breckinridge of Lexington, a graduate of Center College and of Transylvania's Law Department, a lawyer, congressman, United States Senator, Vice President of the United States under James Buchanan, candidate for the presidency in 1860, Confederate Major General, and Confederate Secretary of War. His statue stands on Cheapside, where Henry Clay and Colonel George Nicholas spoke to the roaring crowd in August 1798. Interestingly, John Cabell Breckinridge was the states' rights Democrat candidate for the presidency in 1860. He was introduced to the compact theory of the Constitution early in his life, when his grandmother, Mary Hopkins Cabell Breckinridge, the widow of John Breckinridge, who young John Cabell Breckinridge called Grandma Black Cap, would sit him down on the flat gravestone of his illustrious grandfather at Cabell's Dale and tell him about his grandfather's friendship with Thomas Jefferson and his role in drafting and securing the enactment of the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798 and 1799. John Cabell Breckinridge recalled those times with his grandmother often during his illustrious life. He as well is buried in the Lexington Cemetery. Henry Clay would eventually take the original John Breckinridge's Senate seat, as well as Colonel Nicholas's professorship at Transylvania University. What path his career took thereafter is known by all of us. He's buried in the Lexington Cemetery not far from John Breckinridge and John Cabell Breckinridge. The long-term impact of the Kentucky Resolutions was profound. They were used as the basis for the threatened secession of at least 3 New England states, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, that protested President Madison's embargo during the War of 1812 at a convention held in Hartford, Connecticut in 1814. It was the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798 and 1799 with which Chief Justice John Marshall took issue when in McCulloch against Maryland in 1819, he opined that the federal government was created by the people, not the states, absolving the Bank of the United States from state taxation in Maryland. At the time, Marshall's mother and father lay buried in Mason County, Kentucky. 2 of his brothers and nearly all of his sisters were living in and around Lexington, Kentucky. The Kentucky Resolutions were explicitly cited by representatives of southern states in their threats to secede over northern states' resistance to Missouri entering the Union as a slave state in 1820, and over California's admission to the Union as a free state in 1850. The statesmanship of 1798 and 99 had mutated into threats to shred the Union. John C. Calhoun spoke of the Kentucky Resolutions often, but notably in 1833, when South Carolina actually nullified the high protective tariff of 1828 and then threatened secession if the tariff was not repealed, nearly engulfing the nation in civil war then. Finally, the Kentucky Resolutions were cited by each of the 11 southern states in their ordinance of secession in 1860 and 61, precipitating a bloody 4-year civil war in which their efforts at separation were crushed. All those momentous events in the history of our republic had their philosophical and legal origin in large measure in Kentucky, performed by men who lived, died, and are buried here. The effect of the resolutions today, thankfully, is the subject for another lecture. But let me just say this in closing. So long as the republic endures and is governed by the Constitution that you and I understand it is, the Kentucky Resolutions will always live in spite of the disastrous path adherents of the resolutions took in the years after their enactment. They still speak essential truths that the framers and ratifiers of the Constitution knew and understood. That the federal government was created by the states. That it is a government of limited and enumerated powers. And that there are fundamental political rights of the people which must be held inviolate. And that the tension between federal and state governments and their authority must be respected, so long as those principles are understood. We have a Constitution. Thank you all very much. Want me to answer some questions?
Our speakers agreed to answer some questions. If you all raise your hand, I'll bring a microphone around.
Good. All right. Yes, sir.
There was one point when you had the picture of John Calhoun up there, and you were referring to him wanting to get out of the Union, and I would think maybe you lost an opportunity there to address or at least bring up the response by President Jackson in his nullifiers message. And it seems that if we're here talking about leadership, that the one true leadership out of this whole mess was Jackson's answer to the nullifiers. You know, Adams was, here he was saying, if you even just like the French, we're going to prosecute you for it.
Right.
I mean, what type of leadership was that? I mean, he wasn't even at war, and then the Federalists, you come to the War of 1812, and the Federalists up in New England say, no, we won't go over into Canada. And these were the very people that were on the other side of the coin. So they showed no leadership nor no foresight there. But it was Jackson that he laid it down, and quite frankly let them know that if anybody went into the Charleston tariff office and shed any blood, he would string them up.
Well,
so
and when he started talking about stringing up, people began looking for a rope, as they used to.
That's right. Well, the old when he says go about stringing them up, best go look for hemp.
Yeah. Well, you know, you are right. I mean, in the sense that here's a states' rights man, Andrew Jackson, who abhorred the nullifiers, at least in that dispute he did. And as a result of Calhoun's actions, Jackson proposed a force bill to, by force, make them behave. And of course, then Calhoun responds by saying, we'll nullify that. We won't enforce it in South Carolina, and if you show up on our borders, we'll meet you there. So, I mean, that's how close the nation came. And frankly, the one settling character in that dispute is Henry Clay, who, by the way, his compromise measure in his handwriting is at the Filson Historical Society here in town. He's the one who managed to get the two parties to come to grips with the issue. And they wrenched out a resolution that allowed the tariff of abominations of 1828 to gradually be reduced over a period of years until 1844, when it left altogether. And there were people, no one was more satisfied with that and happy than John C. Calhoun, to be honest. He avoided a very nasty situation that, I mean, the nullifiers then got themselves deep into. But then on the other side of that coin, you look at their situation in the southern states. I mean, they don't manufacture things down there much. There's an agrarian community, and so all of their produce is imported, and so a high protective tariff kills them. And so, and if this is all done at the insistence of bankers in Boston and New York, what about us? And so the man has a legitimate complaint, And, but it came almost to blows. He met a man who was just as tough as he was, maybe more, yeah.
This is kind of a piece of trivia, but the statue of King Louis that sits down at the Jefferson County Courthouse, was that purchased and put in place before all of these events or after?
After, I'm confident.
So this could have been a catalyst to get that statue?
You know, I'll tell you what. I don't know about really the history of that statue, but I do.
If I may,
Sure.
if you go look at the statue, it was a gift from the city of Montpelier in 1967.
Yes, right.
The statue's not that old.
Oh, I thought it had been there a long time.
No.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
statue is very old, but it is, but it was not revered in Montpelier. It was in the basement someplace and was requested by Dr. Brodsky here at the University of Louisville.
Is that right?
To be given to the city, and he managed to get it here without having to pay anything, even transportation on it.
You know, what is interesting, though, is to look at all the counties and cities of Kentucky that bear French names. And that tells you volumes about how deeply committed Kentuckians were to France. Bourbon County, Versailles, Louisville. What's the county seat of Bourbon County? But Paris. It shows you the depth to which Kentuckians were committed to France. And so you can see why the feeling here with respect to the Alien Sedition Acts was just at a fever pitch. Yes?
This will be our last question.
Yes.
At what point was it known that,
I can hear you all right.
at what point was it known that Jefferson, or how well was it known that Jefferson was the primary driver behind the Kentucky resolutions, before he became president or after?
It came after. And where we know he was letters to and from Joseph Breckinridge, John Breckinridge's son, who was the father of John Cabell Breckinridge. And he was the one who, he had heard his mother talk about this relationship, Grandma Blackcap. And he set about a correspondence with Jefferson himself. And those letters indicate that, well, explicit, that Thomas Jefferson says, yes, I wrote it. And of course, what you saw on the screen was his copy that's in the Library of Congress.
Was it publicly known? At what point
No, it was all kept quiet for purposes of Jefferson. He never wanted anybody to know he had been involved in that. Right?
Well, please
Fine.
join me again and thank you, Mr. Ken.
Thank you. Great
We
fun.
got one more thing
Great
left.
fun. Okay.
We got one more bit of business.
Okay.
The United States military has a tradition of giving challenge coins to those who provide exemplary service. For the last few years, the McConnell Center has had the opportunity to be a part of this tradition. 2016 marks the 25th anniversary of the McConnell Center, and to commemorate our history and those who have served our cause, the center has created a new challenge coin, and it will be awarded this evening. This coin features a door on one side. The door stands for those doors that have been opened by those who have helped serve the McConnell Scholars over the years, those who have provided internships, scholarships, advice, and experiences. The reverse side of the coin has been designed to look like a book and represents all those who have contributed to the intellectual development and our imaginations over the years, including, once again, our speaker tonight. Mr. Brown, on behalf of the McConnell Center, it is my pleasure to present you with this small token of our appreciation
Well,
for the
thank you.
contributions to our education system.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all very much. John. Thank you so much. That's cool.
And we also have 2 DVDs that we're giving out by drawing. So, Ms. Deborah Skaggs, if you could bring me the basket, and Mr. Brown, if you'd like to do the honors of drawing.
Back up here.
Yeah. I didn't get one of these, folks, so there won't be any fooling around up here.
We have Debbie Strobel.
Thank you very much.
And Charles Bird. Thank you for coming out tonight. Please take an opportunity to look at the archives out the doors and out through the double doors, and it'll be on your right. Also, we hope that you can come on April 4th for New York Times bestselling author Jay Winnick. We will have copies of his new and very highly acclaimed book, 1944, FDR and the Year That Changed History. That event will be at the PNC Club in Papa John's Cardinal Stadium, and it will include a book signing and reception. Thank you all, and safe travels.